Hey, welcome to Everyday Investor. It's Sarah Larby, your guest host and producer for the show. We have a great one today. We have a great show with Margaret Cameron from Complete Properties, who's going to be sharing everything we need to know about being a landlord and self-managing, or how to find the right property manager and management company. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
So that's a great example. 2 hours away, you want to consider how often can you go, or would you be able to go? So you might not go to rent your property. If you want to effectively lease your property, you're going to have to be there multiple times a week, and 2 hours is a drive. So you're going to first look for someone who might lease for you. There's private leasing companies, real estate agents, and you'll start looking for someone that you have confidence in, you trust, and you talk about their processes with them.
Hey everyone, it's John Temmering from Blackjack Contracting. This week's tips about problems we find in older homes. Older homes are built super strong and they're great structures, but the mechanicals, the electrical, the plumbing, the HVAC are usually in rough shape and need replacement. And those are also the high ticket items. So when you're planning out your budget, it's not all about the pretty things, the quartz countertops, the fancy paint jobs and all that funny stuff. We got to address that because it is so much cheaper to replace it while you're doing a renovation than afterwards. So when you're doing that, you really want to make sure you're working with contractors going to give you pricing so you can build out a proper budget. And don't skip out on the major things behind the walls, because you're going to have super headaches later. It's going to cause the tenant discomfort, disruptions, and it's going to cost you money in the end. Focus on the things behind the walls before you do things on the outer walls, and you're going to have super successful projects. Thanks for having me this week. Goodbye for next time.
The mortgage world has changed. Has your advice? Are you looking for a modern approach to your mortgage planning process? Advice tailored to your unique, ever-changing circumstances? Whether you're upsizing, downsizing, purchasing, or refinancing, the Kyle Ford Mortgage team works with individuals and companies to custom tailor the right mortgage product for you. Working with a wide selection of lenders, we're here to serve our clients and help them achieve their real estate and retirement goals. Contact the Kyle Ford Mortgage team today, Canada's mortgage choice.
Thanks, guys. Omar Khan here with Data Trading and the weekly market update. Now, the markets have gotten off to a pretty rough start this year. I'm talking about the NASDAQ and the S&P 500, the largest in the United States. And the reasons are pretty simple. The markets are a forward-looking mechanism. It's looking forward 12 months. And there's a lot of concern right now. The concerns are inflation, the biggest one, interest rates going up as a result of inflation. And of course, this very unfortunate, dreadful war in the Ukraine. This is all leading to uncertainty. The markets don't like uncertainty. As we get more clarity on the amount of money that companies are making with the next bout of earnings reports that's due this week, we'll get a little bit more clarity in terms of what the markets are thinking. But in the meantime, the markets are concerned about inflation being too high. And thus, as you guys can see, the central banks have been forced to raise interest rates. Now, the idea is this will slow the economy down and therefore bring it into a soft landing scenario. So let's see what happens. But the idea at the end of the day is what we will always do is we will look at how profitable the companies we invest in. That's what ultimately matters to us. Back over to you, and we'll see you guys next week.
Welcome back. Today we are speaking with Margaret Cameron from Complete Properties, and whether or not you are going to be self-managing your portfolio, there are going to be many things that you want to know to be able to do it successfully, or many things that you're going to want to know to be able to hire the right person. So welcome.
Thank you, Sarah.
So I'm excited to talk to you. I mean, you've got lots of experience working with Complete Properties and running a portfolio, and we're going to talk about that. But before we do get into that, let's talk about the person that wants to buy real estate, become a landlord, and self-manage, and what they're going to need to know about that. So somebody that's starting out, with one or two properties, and they want to self-manage, what are some of the things that they should be aware of to do in order to be a successful property landlord?
So I think if someone's looking to self-manage, the first thing they could consider is what they want to do themselves and what they're going to need to hire out for. So if you're going to self-manage, you're going to have to consider that when you're purchasing your property. Is it somewhere that you can travel to show, or are you going to have to hire someone to lease the property for you? Are you going to be able to run down for quick emergencies, or do you need to find a handyman nearby? So you need to decide what you're willing to do and what you might need help for. And then you need to start putting that team together. If you're going to do everything, then you're going to look at your own systems. But if you're going to hire someone else to help you in certain areas, you want to start looking at that team.
Okay. So somebody that is looking at a piece of property and it's like 2 hours away, and they say, okay, well, I'm not going to necessarily have to go and, every single time the tenant calls me for an issue, but you mentioned team, and I think that's a very, very important piece. So let's talk about, who some of the key people are to have on your team if you are going to self-manage in order to try to work, maybe not so much in the business, but on the business to be able to scale.
Yeah, so that's a great example. 2 hours away, you want to consider how often can you go or would you be able to go? So you might not go to rent your property. If you want to effectively lease your property, you're going to have to be there multiple times a week, and 2 hours is a drive. So you're going to first look for someone who might lease for you. There's private leasing companies, real estate agents, and you'll start looking for someone that you have confidence in, you trust, and you talk about their processes with them to get that first step underway. And then once someone's moved in, you have a good tenant, you might not need to head down there quite so often, but you might want a handyman nearby for things that are small that you might not want to drive down for. So you might find someone who's local that you trust for smaller things. And then when it's time for inspections or maybe bigger ticket items, you go down and see it yourself.
Right. Okay. So for me, for example, because I still self-manage a lot of the properties that I have for the short term as well as the long term. And you're right. Like the times that I go there most often is if I'm leasing by myself, because you're showing the tenants and you're screening them. And once they're in, it's not maybe as hands-on, but it is still definitely some things to do. So I'm thinking obviously a handyman, likely a backup handyman. Your HVAC person, a plumber. I mean, I've had so many plumbing issues, every so often, somebody that does all of your, appliance repairs, and likely maybe some contractors or different things like that, depending on the project size. And you did mention inspections. So what are these inspections? So it's easy when you have a property and you've had it for a number of years and maybe you have a great tenant to, kind of stay hands off and not go by, but we think it's important to have a regular visit to your property. So we have these, we recommend a regular inspection, maybe every 6 months, every 3 months. But if you're managing and you're out of town, it's probably even more important to go down on a regular basis and do a walkthrough and see that with your own eyes if you don't have a management company. If you're local, you might drive by and see the garbage at the curb. But if you're out of town, you're going to want to, put those in your calendar and stick to them. Okay. Now, when we do our inspections, we do them like twice a year, as an example. Is that what you would recommend somebody go twice a year, maybe more often, less often? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think twice a year is good. Okay. We recommend going seasonally because there's going to be a fall cleanup, a spring cleanup, things you need to do with the hose, and that's a good way to make sure that you're regularly going. And we think that's enough. You don't want to go too much, but you don't want to forget to have eyes on your property.
Yeah, I'm even thinking from like an insurance standpoint, right? With the smoke and carbon detectors, like what is a good practice for checking those as a property owner?
So just like they recommend for you in your own home with time change to change your batteries and test them, same thing you should do with your rental properties.
Okay, so twice a year, hopefully get the tenant to sign off on it. Like we have a form as an example, and the tenants sign off, because if something happens, you do want to have that proof that you have been checking it, and you've changed the batteries, or you've confirmed that it's in good working order.
Yeah, I think when you go for your inspection, there's different programs that you can use, but if you have 1 or 2 properties, even just a checklist of the items that you see when you go through, have your tenant there, go through with them, let them show you things that they want to point out, and make note of anything that's damaged, anything that needs repairs, and that you've checked what's in good order too, and everybody sign off on that.
So, I mean, it sounds like we're making it sound easy, essentially, but it's not going to be that easy all the time, right? If you have a good tenant that tells you when things need to be repaired, they pay on time, all that good stuff. But what happens if you've got a tenant that is, unfortunately, you might have missed some steps in the screening process, and all of a sudden they start, paying late, or they damage the property. Somebody that's self-managing at that point in time, who might they need on their team, and what would that look like?
Yeah, so you're right. It can really vary the amount of time that one property takes for you to manage the tenants and deal with them regularly, you might hear from them only on the first of the month, and some you'll hear from a lot more. So if you have a tenant that is paying late or maybe is high needs, you might look to get a paralegal on your team with late payments. If you're looking at anything that has to go to the landlord-tenant board, we really recommend having a paralegal that is well experienced and you trust, who can do that process with you from beginning to end. And then, it depends on the relationship with the tenants, but we do have clients come on when that relationship has maybe, started to take up a little bit more time, and then that's when they might come to get some help.
Right. So they're like, here, take the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes.
So obviously a paralegal is good. I mean, I'm a big proponent of having a paralegal on your team before you need them, because even just asking them questions, hey, this is the situation, is my tenants broke up, one wants to be off the lease, or whatever that could be. It could just be a question, but at least it might avoid you getting yourself into more trouble or more complicated situations by having that paralegal that you can put on retainer or something along those lines, so that before you actually need them, you can ask them some questions.
Absolutely. Having a paralegal that's just available to ask them those questions, there's so many new and different situations that we still see, and I get on the phone with the paralegal and ask him, have you seen this before? Or just their advice can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And so, obviously my properties are in Ontario. I think you focus a lot of Ontario as well, but every single municipality is different. So, as a new landlord getting into the landlording game and starting to take over properties and bringing in tenants, looking at the tenant landlord rules, I think, is going to be critical. Depending on where you are in Canada, there's going to be, places that are going to be more pro tenants, or some that are going to be a little bit more balanced and whatnot. What can you share with doing that due diligence piece before they go ahead and find that tenant?
So that's a really good point. The rules across the country really vary widely, and if someone is buying in a new province, they need to dig into those landlord-tenant rules. Become part of those communities of landlords in the area. You'll learn a lot just hearing the conversations, hearing other investors' experiences, and then again, looking for those trusted professionals, a real estate agent who's used to working with investors, even out-of-town investors, a paralegal who's got a lot of experience. Just starting to fill that toolbox of team members before you make that purchase.
Yeah, so it sounds like if somebody is going to self-manage, self-manage in terms of directing others to go to the property and get repairs done, and maybe they might want to do the twice-a-year inspection themselves. But ultimately, it sounds like it can be done potentially, right? It depends on the size of the portfolio and if somebody wants to do it or not. But it can be done through just having the right team in place to say, hey, there's a leak here, or the furnace went here, and then having them go to the property, send you an invoice afterwards. So it can still be done, just depends on how hands-on or hands-off somebody might want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And just building that team. And I think once the team is built, things would be a lot easier. If you have a call for emergency heat, the last thing you want to do is start calling HVAC companies that you've never dealt with in the middle of the night. You want someone you trust who can go. And once you have those types of relationships built, it would make self-managing a lot more manageable. What
are some recommendations for somebody starting out to find that team of plumbers or handy people and all that?
Yeah, so referrals is great. Ask people who who are doing this. Who do they use? Who do they trust? And personally, I found it's a lot of trial and error. We've built a team we trust, a lot from referrals, and a lot of people we just came across and we used them and were really pleased, and now they're our go-to.
Okay, amazing. Anything else that you would recommend a new landlord do when they have the tenants? I know we talked about the twice-a-year inspection, but is there anything else that they should be keeping a pulse on?
So I think you just want to set out your expectations with the tenants really clearly in the beginning, especially when we're talking about maintenance. When do we want to hear from you? Make sure you call us if there's a drip or a leak. Make sure you're keeping the lines of communication open, because even great tenants might not think to reach out, or they might decide they can handle it on their own, but you want to know what's going on in your investment.
Awesome. So it sounds to me that like somebody can still get in as a landlord, first-time landlord, and still self-manage. Again, it depends if they want to be, managing the team and coordinating with the trades and whatnot, as well as with their tenants. So ultimately, you just need a great team to be able to do this, but it's not going to be for everybody. It is not every single person that wants to deal with this kind of stuff. Some people want to be more hands-off. And so we're going to actually have you come and speak to us about what Complete Properties does and why sometimes hiring the property manager is the right way to do it. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Have you been turned down by a bank? Do you not think you can qualify for a mortgage because what the person at the teller told you? Make sure when it comes to sourcing your mortgage, you're using the right broker. For example, if you're self-employed for less than 2 years, there are absolutely financing options that are available to you at reasonable terms. They may not be the best rate, but if that mortgage product allows you to get into a house now, that can secure your family's home and future. So many people hear no from the bank and they think there's no other options. Make sure you're investigating not only the A lenders and the banks, credit unions, monoline lenders, B lenders, and mix. There's many levels of lending institutions that are happy to fund you and your family's home, just maybe not at the same interest rate. For this, reach out to myself and the Kyle Ford Mortgage team. We're here to help.
If you're looking to raise more capital, do bigger deals, and scale your portfolio, the Multifamily Conference is for you. The Multifamily Conference is live and in person May 14th and 15th in Toronto. Put yourself in the room with multifamily investors from across North America to network, learn, and have fun. Tickets are on sale now at multifamilyconference.ca. Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary will be sharing his capital raising secrets. Joe Fairless, who controls almost $2 billion of multifamily assets, will be breaking down his scaling framework. And our other top speakers cover every single aspect of the multifamily business, including underwriting, financing, management, deal flow, structuring, and much, much more. Get back out there. Face-to-face networking is back. Reserve your seat now at multifamilyconference.ca.
You've always dreamed of having rental income, but buying a rental property? Well, that's a tall order. Capitalize on the space in your home instead. Renovate and rent out that space with ease with LegalSecondSuites.com and the team at Wise Construction Group. With LegalSecondSuites.com, our talented team of BCIN designers, engineers, carpenters, and tradespeople can transform that unused space into a beautiful, legal, and safe rental unit. We're empowering the everyday homeowner to become an extraordinary landlord. Get more out of your home. Visit LegalSecondSuites.com for more information.
Welcome back. We are speaking with Margaret Cameron from Complete Properties, and I want to really dive into now what somebody needs to be doing or looking for in order to hire the right property manager if they choose to be more hands-off or they're purchasing a property maybe in a different province or further away. So let's start talking about how to even vet for that right property management company.
Absolutely. So I would always start again with referrals. If you know anyone else investing in that area, I'd ask them, who do you use? Who do you recommend? And start there. Talk to that company and also ask them for references. Who can I reach out to that's your current client who I can ask a little bit more questions to? I think that's especially important if you are purchasing out of province and you can't be there to meet people face to face. I think that's a good extra vetting process. And then I think you want to have an idea of what you're looking for from your property manager and what you need to know before you have that phone call. So what are you looking for in terms of inspections, financial reports, communication? How hands-off do you want to be and how hands-on do you want to be? And make sure that they can match you with that. So let's dig into like a little bit of specifics. So let's just say they're vetting or they got a couple referrals for 2 property management companies. Like, what are some good questions
and maybe some potential answers that you're going to want to look out for that could be a red flag or could be a great thing, right? Depending on what their answers are. So let's just go through maybe like 3 top questions to ask a property management company to vet them.
So I would ask them, what does your financial reporting looks like? I think that's really important. You want to make sure that the information that you're looking to have as an overview for your property is available, and what system do they use to give that to you? I would ask them what their communication expectation is. How often should you expect to hear from them? When will they reach out to you with information? What can you expect that relationship to look like as you go forward? And then I would also ask them, of course, about their fees and their fee structure. And I find in most situations, you'll find that there's different fee structures, different things that are the way that they operate compared to someone else. And I think that's really good to have clear up front in the beginning, because you'll of course have it's your investment property, so you need to know what you're spending for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that I'm thinking as you're saying that is, if somebody's average, let's just say average is 8%, right? I mean, it'll fluctuate. 8% of gross rents is a typical property management fee on average. And somebody's like, I'm going to do it for 4%. And these are for like more like the smaller like singles and duplexes. And somebody's at 4%, but all of a sudden you need this or that, and then they add more margin into that cost. So you might actually be paying more ultimately. So I think that's a great point to really dig into, see. It's not only just about like, the percentage per month, but like what about if you need their services or they need to dispatch a plumber or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. What's the monthly percentage fee? And that's what everyone's going to give you first. But what else are you spending on? And what does that look like over the month for your cash flow?
So we've got that. We've got some questions. And then in terms of, like you mentioned, the communication, like what, let's just say, Complete Properties as an example, like what can we expect from Complete Properties in terms of like how often you communicate with clients, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it comes across in many different spots, depending on where you are with your property management. If you have something for lease, then you're going to hear from us at least once a week with a leasing report, letting you know what's going on with your property. And you're going to hear from us when we have applications that we're vetting. If you have a property that's, already tenanted, running smoothly, you might just hear from us once a month with your owner reports. And if there's anything coming up, the way we do things is if we have anything come up from a tenant, we're going to share that with the owner if there's something that needs to be repaired or spent. But we're not going to communicate every back and forth with the tenant to the owner to keep that line of communication open, but not too much, right? You've hired a property manager, so you don't have to hear all of the little issues. So our clients can expect from us, you're going to hear from us when it's necessary. And when it's not, we'll deal with it on our own, but you're going to have your reports at least once a month.
Okay. All right. So reports once a month. And, I think one of the questions I've been receiving from some students recently is when they hire a property management company, I think they don't realize sometimes that so the property management collects all the income and then you reduce your fee and different things like that before they get the income. Can we just walk through how that actually works? Because I think sometimes people think the tenants pay them directly into their bank account.
Right, so that's absolutely right. Once you hire a property management company, they're the acting landlord, forward-facing in all ways. So your tenants communicate with them directly and pay them directly. They're going to take off their monthly fee, any agreed upon expenditures, and they're going to deposit you the rest. And that's another good point. You want to know when are the deposits coming through to your bank and when can you expect them. And when you make those reference calls, check on those. Are they coming when you expect them to? Are the reports coming when you expect them to? And does the communication plan follow what was set out?
So now let's estimate or let's say that a tenant has not paid. It's the first of the month. Now it's the second of the month, and they haven't paid. What is a typical property management process from that point?
So if you don't have rent by the second of the month, you're going to want to reach out, haven't got your rent, just checking in, a friendly communication. If we don't have rent by the 4th of the month, we would send our N4, which is the Ontario form for notice of non-payment. So we actually use the paralegal for all of our N4s. They prepare them, they send them. We want to make sure they're absolutely right from the very beginning if that ever has to go to the board. But then we're going to send that M4. If we get a tenant reach out and say, I'm going to be paid by the 10th of the month, the N4 would, if we sent it on the 4th, would last till the 28th. We'll say, okay, thank you so much, but you're still going to get this N4. You pay your rent, don't worry about it. But you want to send that N4 every month because, one, if you have to go to the board for consistent late payment, you want a paper trail of that. And if something changes and they don't pay, and that's the beginning of, a further late payment, further non-payment, you want to start that from the beginning. People pay late sometimes, they clear it up and it's fine, but also when someone doesn't pay for 6 months, there was the first time, and you want to start that N4 right then.
I think there is something to be said, right, about having the right processes and procedures in place, and everybody is essentially, in following that same process and procedure. Because, again, look, if someone has been a great tenant for 1 year and there's a slip up, it is what it is. But sometimes you hear the stories about a landlord not being paid for 3 or 4 months, and they haven't even issued the N4 to start that process and the application. So then there's all of this. And in provinces, not every province, but in provinces like Ontario, it's not necessarily a month process. Like there's definitely, a length of time to go through that. And I think it's just about processes and procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a process and a procedure, it's good for your owner, so your clients, to have an expectation. And then it's good for your tenants as well. They know they're going to get the N4. They know if they're paid up on time, then the N4 is closed. It's no longer relevant, but they know what to expect. And I think that can go a long way for payment, and for, like you said, if you're going to have to go to the board, you want to get in line right away.
And look, real estate is amazing. Like we've all done really well doing what we do, but there's also, sometimes stress and complications that come with, creating wealth and making money. And this is, one of the many things that can happen. And it's just about, do you want to handle it yourself? Do you want to hire a property manager? Who are you going to have on your team to be able to help maneuver through that process as efficiently as possible? And I think it also goes back though to, if you're inheriting tenants, it's one thing, but if you're choosing and you're picking your tenants, I think that is quite critical. What are some of the maybe processes and procedures that you have for tenant screening, as an example, that you would recommend either somebody do themselves if they want to self-manage, or just make sure that they confirm with the property manager that these processes are taking place?
Yeah, absolutely. So tenant vetting is probably the most important part when you are a property manager or self-managing, because that's your first opportunity to have the best outcome for your property over the next few years. So I think every application is fairly standard. You're going to ask for current landlord references, previous landlord references, current employer, previous employer, and credit. But you have to call those references. You have to really check them and have a really solid confidence that they're true. So if someone gives you a landlord reference and you call the current one and it's good, but you don't call the second one, you've only done half of the vetting. If you call it and it seems questionable, then you need to dig a little deeper. As a property management company, we have some tools that let us do that digger deeping, maybe a little bit easier than someone who's self-managing. When someone gives me a reference, I'm going to check, does that name match the owner of the property? If it doesn't, then I'm going to ask that person on the phone, do you manage it? I'm going to look for an old rental ad. I'm going to look for an old MLS listing, and just make sure you're talking to the right person. And I think that's the number one thing, because if someone has a bad tenant history, they're going to give you a false reference. And if you hear that they're great, that can give you some false confidence.
And before we wrap up, I do want to mention how critical it is to understand what you can say yes for, what you can say no for, and if they get rejected, how to specifically say that, because otherwise you can get yourselves in a lot of trouble, and it might be worth just having if you're not experienced doing it, having somebody do it for you that understands how to say no to a tenant that wants a property, because you might have 10 applications for one property and you can only pick one.
Yeah, absolutely. If you only have one apartment to rent, and these days you're probably going to have more showings and applications than that, you're going to have to say no to some people, and you're right, it's a delicate conversation.
Absolutely. Margaret, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure. We're going to have your contact information there so folks can reach out. And thanks for tuning in at home. We hope that you learned a lot about, do you want to self-manage? Do you want to hire somebody out? And if you want to hire somebody out, for what part? Is it everything, the tenant management or the tenant screening? And just make sure that you do your due diligence, not only on your team if you're going to self-manage, but your due diligence on the property manager. And on that note, I hope you guys come back next week. Thanks for tuning in.